From so much working, the pharmacist ends up dying at the age of 31. He wakes up in the body of a 10-year-old boy named Pharma, in the Middle Ages, in a very different world. Since he was extremely confused, Latte, his servant, thinking he had lost his memory for being struck by lightning, explains that Pharma belongs to an aristocratic family of pharmacists, the Mataci. Then she notices a mark on his shoulder and says it looks like the sacred mark of the god of medicine and begins to pray, thanking God for saving her master's life, even though Pharma explains it was a burn from when the lightning passed through. Since Latte shows she likes her master, he takes the opportunity to ask her everything. She, thinking he had only lost his memory, explains that the Mataci, his family, are the royal pharmacists, and his father holds the title of Archduke for being a noble of notable skill. He had a mother, a little sister named Blanche, and an older brother named Pal, who was abroad studying medicine at the best university in the world. She explains that his father has high expectations for both of them, not only as pharmacists but also as practitioners of divine arts, powers bestowed by the gods similar to magic. Since he also doesn't seem to remember this, Latte worries, because if he doesn't recall how to use his water divine art, he might cease to be considered noble and could even be expelled from the property. He then goes to his room thinking about what Latte had explained. He must remember the form of water to perform the divine art. He then tries to imagine the molecular structure of water, and to his astonishment, water begins to flow from his hand. Not knowing what to do, he throws all the water out the window, accidentally soaking Latte, who thanks her master for refreshing her and watering the garden. He decides to test creating other elements and discovers that with one hand, he can create any substance as long as he knows its molecular structure. With the other, he can eliminate them. Latte comes to the room delighted that he has managed to perform his divine art but worries that he might have lost his medicinal knowledge, since his father always asks surprise questions during meals. She then takes him to the family library, where he discovers he had been studying them since childhood, but upon opening one of the books, he realizes it was like the medical knowledge of Earth, yet centuries behind. And thus at dinner, he finally meets his family, discovering they are lovely and considers how he will have to live Pharma's life. After his father, Bruno, asks a surprise question that he answers correctly, he asks if Pharma feels well enough to resume his lessons. And so, the next day, we meet his teacher named Ellen, who was the first to notice how he was behaving completely differently, as if he were someone else. He uses the same excuse he gave Latte, saying he lost his memory. She then reviews the basics of divine arts, explaining that all aristocrats have a guardian deity and that, in his family's case, it is the god of medicine, with each receiving an attribute of the divine arts, either positive or negative, such as fire, water, earth, air, and the void. However, the last wasn't seen in over 300 years, if it even existed. He then asks if someone could create any substance, but she said that such an ability was impossible, and that someone with such power would be a god or a monster. So they go on to practice, where he discovers that he needs his staff to amplify his divine power. Realizing he left his at home, she lends him hers for practice. She asks him to create a sample of water by doing a small demonstration, but when it's Pharma's turn, he shows power far above normal. She becomes concerned by what's happening and asks him to hold a divinometer, which would measure his power. He is completely startled by the capacity values on the divinometer, and it also shows both positive and negative attributes, things never seen before. The poor thing gets so scared that she breaks her glasses. Then she sees the sacred mark of the god of medicine glowing on his shoulder and tells Pharma that he should never hold a divinometer in front of anyone, not even his father. She decides to end the lesson for the day, but without her glasses, Pharma helps her find her way back. Later, he teaches her a trick by asking her to make a small hole with her fingers and look through it, and she is surprised to see that she can see better this way. But Pharma's bigger surprise comes when looking through the hole between his fingers. He sees everything dark with only a blue light on Ellen's finger. Upon touching it, he discovers she had twisted it earlier. After Pharma points out the injury, the blue light turns white. After explaining what he saw to her, she becomes even more alarmed, realizing it was the divine eye of the god of medicine. When she notices the boy has no shadow, that's when she truly panics and runs away in fear. The next day, Pharma's father tells him there would be no class that day as she has a high fever and wants to stop teaching, and asks Pharma to take her a letter and a nutritional potion. As she needs medicine to reduce the fever, which is non-existent in that world, he decides to create and prescribe the necessary medications himself. He goes to Ellen's house to deliver the letter from his father and the medications, but she is still afraid of him, appearing in armor thinking he was there to eliminate her for knowing his secret, and begins to think the medications were poisoned. But he explains he came to see how she was doing and to ask her to continue being his teacher, as he needed her to learn about the divine arts, giving flowers as thanks for her time as his tutor and apologizing for scaring her before leaving. She remains a bit wary, so she stores the medicines, but remembering he was like a god and how gods didn't have a history of harming humans, decides to take the medication. After some time, she appears determined to be his teacher again, grateful for the medicine that cured her, but explains she will continue wearing armor, and they will train on a deserted island as a precaution against any accidents. And so, the two of them train with his divine powers proving to be extraordinary. Later, he analyzes all the workers at his house with his special vision, making a list of their health issues, and then uses his ancient medical knowledge to make the medicines with the divine art. After finishing, he distributes them, starting with a moisturizer for Latte's dry hands, and notices all the workers are very emotional. Latte explains that servants never received medical treatments before, as it was something exclusive to aristocrats, given the high cost of medicines was beyond commoners' reach. Pharma then reflects that with the period's medical knowledge and high medicine prices, mortality rates must be high, deciding he wants to make medicines available to all who need them, regardless of social class, making Latte very happy. Later, during a family meal, he discovers his little sister has chickenpox, an illness still considered very dangerous in that world, and his father asks him to be careful, as even though he already had chickenpox and medicine hasn't proven it, it is said reinfection is possible, leaving Pharma impressed with how smart his father is since even on Earth, this had been discovered recently. He then uses his powers once again to prepare the medicine for Blanche and goes to her secretly, asking her to keep it a secret about the medicine, claiming he found the knowledge in a book unknown to his father. During she starts scratching herself, and Pharma says the virus would spread, realizing they didn't yet know about viruses or bacteria. Then she comments that Pharma had changed, acting like a more caring brother and disliking how he was now, making him remember his little sister who had died in his previous life. After curing her much faster than usual, thanks to the medicine, he decides to make a microscope to present bacteria to that world. Upon finishing, his father says there's an emergency call from the empress with serious health problems. He explains Pharma would accompany him. When he starts coughing constantly, Pharma gets worried and tries to examine his father, but it would be suspicious to do so at that moment, so he puts it off. When they reach the empress, they are greeted by the court's chief physician, who accompanies them to her, Elizabeth II, who truly isn't in good health. After his father examines her using a method different from our world, he starts preparing, and Pharma realizes they are performing euthanasia, giving up on Elizabeth's life, just as they had with his sister in his previous life. He then decides to examine them, discovering she has tuberculosis, known at the time as the White Plague, a disease believed incurable there. At that moment, the prince appears, very concerned about his mother. Pharma cannot remain idle in such a situation and requests permission to treat them, saying there's a new medicine for her. His father tries to stop him, but the empress grants permission, since he's the only one still hopeful of saving her life. So Pharma begins preparing the medicines, but his father breaks down the door, trying to stop him, thinking he's giving the empress false hope, surprising Pharma, who thought his father didn't know the disease. But he continues making the medicines, and his father, worried he might be accidentally creating poison, tries to stop him. But Pharma uses his powers to restrain his father, making him question such abilities. Noticing Pharma's notebook, he demands an explanation from him. Having no other choice, Pharma claims he dreamed about the new medicines the day he was struck by lightning, leading his father to believe the god of medicine had given him revelations because of his mark on the shoulder. His father then accepts him conducting the medication and notices that his son's actions are quite different, questioning if it is indeed him. After some time, Pharma comes with a medicine and seizes the moment to show Elizabeth the existence of bacteria, using a sample from her and his microscope, and everyone is astounded to see it, without fully understanding what they were. Pharma explains to the empress about the disease and the medicine, and she decides to accept the remedy, feeling confident in Pharma. He explains that it is a lengthy treatment, which he would personally monitor, and after she takes the medicine, he begins answering the questions of the present physicians, making his father proud. On the way home, his father reflects on how, as a pharmacist, he understands his patients, but since Pharma hadn't been a very paternal father, after Pharma gives his father a cough medicine to take, he comments that now he'll have to learn from Pharma since he's been blessed by the god and gained much greater knowledge than he. But Pharma says he had never treated near-death patients personally before. It was he who advised how to act and said he was still a learner needing his father's help to forge his path. And so, the two start exchanging information, with his father marveling at the new medicines. His father then comments that some people might want to eliminate him and mentions that even there were suspicions that someone could have purposely infected the empress. But Pharma doubts it, as it was nearly impossible to do. Later, Pharma visits Elizabeth to see how she is and meets Lord Noah, who explains to him that the empress is deciding what reward to give him for saving her life. Pharma says he wouldn't expect a reward, but after the Lord insists, he mentions that his dream is to open a pharmacy. Later, he meets Elizabeth, and we see she is much better. She thanks him for everything, but mentions she was worried about her authority as empress since everyone thought she was going to die. Pharma then consoles her, saying that as long as her son and the people who need her exist, she would never be useless, and she says his words are like medicine for the heart. He then comments that he, too, had seen death up close, and that made him appreciate his next life more. A few months later, upon Elizabeth's request, Pharma and his father attend an important ceremony where she grants his father a large territory and promotes Pharma from apprentice to royal pharmacist, granting him permission to open a pharmacy. After presenting his pharmacy project, Pharma muses aloud about a possible name for it, commenting that he never imagined realizing his dream in a parallel world. One of the workers overhears and interprets this as the name. Thus, the pharmacy is built and named Parallel World Pharmacy. When the guild master of the Empire's pharmacies, named Varen, appears and begins belittling Pharma due to his age, the boy maintains his composure. Later, Pharma, along with Ellen, thinks about how they will manage everything, and Lade appears begging to continue serving Pharma, delighted about being able to work with him in the pharmacy. However, they still needed someone to handle the store's finances. Upon arriving home, Pharma sees everyone in low spirits and discovers that Mr. Cedric, one of the house staff, is retiring due to a leg problem, a trustworthy guy who managed the estate's finances. Pharma then asks if he would be interested in working at his pharmacy if his leg were healed, and Cedric gets excited about the idea. Afterwards, his father gives Pharma a substantial sum to manage his pharmacy peacefully, quite a gift, even though Pharma already had more than enough to start his work. Thus, the place is inaugurated with a long speech by Pharma, who openly explains that it is a pharmacy for both nobles and commoners, making commoners anxious and nobles offended by the news. Despite this, Pharma is super excited to see his dreams coming to fruition, but after a month with his store open, he realizes it is going to be harder than he thought. Since the commoners already have their traditional pharmacies, and nobles usually opt for service within their estates, his store's activity is super low. So Lade decides to conduct a survey in the region regarding opinions about the pharmacy, and discovers that most commoners didn't frequent the store because they didn't feel welcome, which is why they essentially had only one regular customer. Later, his parents visit the shop and are impressed by their son's professionalism. The pharmacy even has a bathroom and kitchen. However, Pharma struggles to make the commoners feel welcome, and his mother suggests selling cosmetics to aristocrats, saying that if it became popular among the nobles and at affordable prices, the commoners would start to buy too. Pharma then recalls when he conducted research on cosmetics in his previous life to assess product safety, but his father warns of the dangers of facial white powder, explaining that it was harmful to health and mentions that he found it absurd for people to compromise their health for appearance, noting that some women even resort to bloodletting to pale their skin, which is indeed pretty drastic. His mother says she understands the stance of these women, and his father comforts her, saying she doesn't need to because she's already beautiful, and there is a rather sweet moment between the two. Suddenly, a man appears looking for Pharma and takes him to Lady Chloe, who is very ill. He uses his vision and realizes the young woman had just used the bloodletting method, which had become infected in the pharmacy. Besides explaining that she messed up trying to become more attractive for a guy who rejected her for not being pale enough, an absurdity. After the lovely young woman, Pharma delivers the necessary medications to her, asking her not only to stop the bloodletting, as it would put her life at risk, but also to stop using the white powder as it shortened her life. The young woman begins to cry, and he then asks her to return in a week. After this time, she returns and discovers he had made a cream for her to apply to her face that wasn't harmful and still left a much better appearance than the powder she used, also containing sunscreen, something non-existent at the time, leaving the lady very happy with the material. After this, the store boomed with the creams, becoming increasingly successful. Thus, the commoners realized that indeed, the pharmacy had affordable prices and even pictures to assist those who couldn't read. But with a large number of clients, it became much for Pharma, and the creams ran out very fast. Additionally, Chloe returns to the store bringing her friends to show the creams and notices what was happening, resolving to become a partner, hiring top unemployed pharmacists to help with the service, which eased the workload and provided a new job opportunity for the young women. After some time, Lotte conducts her survey with the public, and everyone rejoices seeing that all comments about the store were positive. Later, Empress Elizabeth visits the store to see the creams everyone is talking about and makes clear to Pharma she wants to be the first to see new products. So he apologizes and presents her with a lip gloss, with which she is enchanted by the result and comments that companies dealing toxic beauty products were on the brink of bankruptcy. Sometime later, everyone goes to Pharma's father's new land that he received from the Empress. While his father handles business, Pharma decides to go to the beach, and his father makes it clear he shouldn't go into the sea. But upon arrival, Blanche and Lotte plead with him to at least let them wet their feet in the sea, and he eventually caves, with a condition that they stay on the edge as neither could swim. Then, they decide to join them in the sea. Pharma remembers his little sister from his previous life, who also loved the sea but couldn't go because she was too young, and Pharma promised that next year, when she was older, they'd swim together. Sadly, shortly thereafter they discover her illness, and he couldn't fulfill his promise. At that moment, the worst possible thing ends up being taken by the current, and before the others could react, Pharma was already swimming after her, desperately, fearing losing his little sister in this world too. With Blanche going deeper and deeper in panic, Pharma ends up activating his power and literally nullifies an entire part of the sea in an extremely eerie way, managing to save Blanche before she got into danger. He tells her he thinks it was a negative attribute, but he explains that even negative attributes don't do such things. But with the power, whether frightening or not, thanks to it, Pharma managed to save his little sister. At night, Pharma realizes how risky it had been to remove all the water from the place, as the body is made of water, and he could have removed the water from Ellen and Blanche's bodies. He thinks he should truly be afraid. Lotte appears, reassuring him, saying she wasn't afraid of him but admired his power and heroism, and expresses feeling guilty for not going to rescue Blanche, but Pharma also reassures her, saying she did right, as she couldn't swim, so she would have only put her life at risk, and says he would hate if something happened to her. In the end, they part ways, much more relieved after the conversation. Meanwhile, people in white cloaks report hearing rumors of a boy without a shadow who nullified part of the sea, and that if the rumors were true, they would have to eliminate him. The next day, one of the hooded figures appears in Pharma's pharmacy, leaving him a bit intrigued, as they didn't seem interested in the store. In the middle of the night, during the guard shift change, a runaway horse pulling a cart ends up charging into the pharmacy, destroying everything inside, clearly something staged by someone who didn't like Pharma, suspecting either the pharmacy guild or the hooded figures. Despite the almost total destruction of the store, all the customers contributed to help with the repairs, leaving Pharma emotional seeing how loved his pharmacy was. Suddenly, a young woman appears pleading for Pharma to help her father. He then goes with her to where her father was, but when Pharma notices it was quite an isolated area of the city, he realizes he had fallen into a trap and was surrounded by hooded figures, inquisitors of the Holy Kingdom, responsible for identifying deity in children and selecting governors of each nation, even being above the Empress's power, meaning Pharma was in serious trouble, thinking Pharma was an evil spirit. They try to imprison him by various means, but Pharma blocks all their attempts, increasingly alarming them and deciding to attack to kill. With no other choice, Pharma defends himself, toppling Commander Solomon from his horse while Pharma literally glowed, demonstrating absurd power. He explains he wants to use his abilities to heal and doesn't wish to harm anyone, asking them to withdraw. With the glow, they recognize the mark of the god of medicine on his shoulder, and deeming Pharma an evil spirit, they begin to consider him a god. They apologize to Pharma, and Commander Solomon says he would atone for such an error with his death, but Pharma stops him in time and notices he had fractured his leg in a fall and would need surgery. Despite being a pharmacist, he thinks that as surgeons of the time didn't have much knowledge and relied mainly on luck, he was the best option. He performs surgery on him. Fortunately, everything goes well, and everyone thanks the god of medicine, who not only didn't punish them but also saved the commander's life. Even afterwards, Solomon appears at Pharma's pharmacy, making it clear he would use his position to help Pharma conceal his divine powers, and reveals he brought a gift from his time, the staff of the god of medicine. Pharma takes the staff, which begins to glow, and Solomon says it recognized the god of medicine. But when Ellen tries to hold the staff, it literally phases through her hand, and Solomon explains that only someone not from this world could hold it, as if the staff couldn't be better. Pharma realizes he could fly on it like a little sorcerer. Upon leaving, we discover that Solomon wasn't responsible for the cart, so the main suspect indeed was the guild owner, Varen. And if the gift of the staff weren't enough, he gives Pharma a talisman that would give him a shadow, so his presence in the sun wouldn't be suspicious. Pharma seems more thrilled by the talisman than the staff, and explains that with it, he could go for walks with his little sister without worry. And so, Pharma strolls with the two at ease. He thinks of how his pharmacy was growing and would need new partnerships and staff. Suddenly, he sees another pharmacy of a pharmacist named Pierre, with a customer wanting to buy the same products as Pharma's store, but the shopkeeper explains that commoners need a guild to make that partnership, and only Varen's guild existed. Back at his store, Pharma decides that to expand his pharmacy and be able to distribute his products to other stores, he would need to have a guild, and so they begin preparations to create one. Meanwhile, Varen, the guild master, holds a meeting with all his members to criticize Pharma's pharmacy and makes it clear that any guild members who went to that store would lose their commercial license. However, Pierre's daughter starts burning with fever, and he tries taking her to several pharmacies, but all are closed. Pierre ends up running into Pharma and, having no other choice, goes to his shop where Pharma guides him to the back doors. He assumes this was the entrance for commoners who couldn't enter through the front, but later discovers it was actually to prevent his daughter's infection from spreading. And so Pharma examines her, showing knowledge and care for patients beyond the norm, leaving Pierre impressed with the treatment, the results, and the prices, understanding why clients no longer wanted to visit other pharmacies. At home, Pierre confesses to his wife that he had to go to Pharma's pharmacy, and she worries that if Varen finds out, he would be expelled from the guild. But he comments that as pharmacists, they should learn from Pharma to evolve and help people, and he feels sad knowing that if his wife or daughter were to get ill and relied on the guild, they would likely die, as their treatment was inferior and based on luck. So the next day, Varen holds another meeting with the guild to complain about Pharma, as if he had nothing else to do, and they all gripe that indeed Pharma's pharmacy was a problem since it was taking all their customers and could put them out of business. Being a noble, Pharma could easily stop serving commoners, leaving them with no pharmacy at all. Certainly, we know Pharma wouldn't do such a thing, but their concern makes a bit of sense. However, Varen asks Pierre, who had the nearest shop to Pharma, for his opinion and is surprised by his sincerity, saying that instead of seeing Pharma as a threat, they could consider him a partner and learn from him, which indeed was a good solution. But everyone finds this absurd, and Pierre questions if anyone there had actually gone into Pharma's pharmacy, and everyone denies it, thinking it unnecessary to check the competition. However, Pierre ends up saying that if they went there, they'd understand why nobody goes to any other pharmacy anymore, making it clear that he himself had gone there and loved it. Unfortunately, because of this, Pierre is expelled from the guild, being seen as a traitor. The next day, his pharmacy is destroyed, and he is desperate, wondering how he will work to support his family since he needs guild permission to continue being a pharmacist. When Pharma passes by his shop, he discovers what happened and informs Pierre that he has just received the Empress's permission to have a guild and invites Pierre to be the first to join it, thus informing his shop now has the same products as Pharma's pharmacy. Despite this, he worries whether he will have customers with the new guild, but fortunately, when he opens the door, he gets emotional seeing a crowd of people waiting for the shop to open. In the end, everything turns out well for Pierre, who not only continues with a guild but gains more clients, able to provide the treatment he wanted for his customers. Some time passes. At Pharma's house, during a family dinner, they receive a letter from Pal, Pharma's older brother, who is attending medical school. In the letter, he says he is postponing his visit due to a peculiar epidemic emerging, and that it has already killed about 1,000 people and seems to be contagious, likely brought in by contaminated merchandise arriving through ships, precisely in his father's lands. Pharma asks his father to request some kind of sample of the disease to get more information. Meanwhile, the Empress holds a meeting to reflect on everything Pharma has done to improve medical quality and considers granting him the title of Archduke, but he is too young, making it impossible at the moment, although it's evident that the boy will certainly have an important position once he's of age. Later, Pharma receives his brother's response and discovers the disease is the dreaded Black Plague and begins preparations to prevent it from spreading. Later, he reports everything to his father, who already suspected this disease, and is surprised by how quickly his son took every possible precaution, including manufacturing necessary medications for treatment and sending a large supply to partner pharmacies. However, they still needed to avoid contamination as much as possible and go to the Empress to inform her of the situation. There, she agrees to limit trade entries. Pharma also explains they should eliminate carriers of the disease, fleas, and rodents, and with these measures, everything should be fine. He He finally creates a worthy microscope that allows research into diseases. With this, the Black Plague is kept under control thanks to Pharma's knowledge and everyone's help. Meanwhile, in a temple, a prisoner escapes from prison, an evil spirit. And so the time passes. Ellen inspects all arriving ships with merchandise to ensure the Black Plague doesn't reach land. Despite everything being under control, the crew becomes impatient with inspection delays, complaining that the products might spoil and even start arguing among themselves to be released first. But Jean, the Empire's commander and Pharma's first regular customer, appears to help. Upon finishing inspecting the current ships, Pharma discovers a nearby village was contaminated by the plague, spreading quickly with some merchandise they received from smugglers. After leaving Ellen in command to continue inspecting incoming ships, he flies with his staff to the village and discovers another power of his to pass through objects. In the village, he arrives just in time to prevent some people from leaving the area, explaining they can't leave the village. They think Pharma is an evil spirit trying to lead them to death since the boy appeared out of nowhere. But he quickly calms them with a massive ice sculpture and explains he is a pharmacist providing treatment for all, and that they cannot leave without treatment as they would not only spread the disease but also die inside. He asks to isolate the infected from the non-infected and to separate those with severe symptoms for quick treatment. Meanwhile, Ellen helps keep the ships in order. She sees a ship approaching, ignoring her orders, but upon getting closer, she discovers everyone on board was dead from the disease and laments that some might have survived if they'd received proper treatment, ordering her men to sink the ship. In the village, Pharma is reaching the end of his work, now in the hardest part where those severely ill were kept, and there he encounters Solomon again. After using his vision, he discovers 2 of the patients were there by mistake, confusing their plague symptoms with a simple cold, and of the other 12, most could be treated, and so he treats them all with Solomon and his people's help. Meanwhile, Ellen oversees the inspections in Pharma's place, worried if she was doing a good job. After all, she didn't have an eye showing who was or wasn't infected. Meanwhile, a lady, about to have her research work halted due to her retirement and not taken seriously by anyone, is called to see Pharma's father, who asks her to defer her retirement since Pharma found out she had in her lab the necessary substance to produce the plague medicine so that everyone stopped relying on him and his skills to make medicines. After a long day of work, Pharma finally manages to treat everyone and get most out of severe condition, and heads home when he notices smoke and goes to investigate. The people of the Holy Kingdom had captured smugglers responsible for contaminating the village in exchange for disease treatment. They confessed they were paid to carry some boxes, one containing plague-transmitting rats, coming precisely from where the epidemic originated. Pharma reflects that this might have been done on purpose by someone wanting to destroy the Empire, which would explain the Empress's contamination with the White Plague. Meanwhile, in the capital, Lotte distributes masks to prevent the disease. When they suffer an invasion of 5 sacred knights, who release rodents everywhere, flying squirrels, the quickest way to spread the disease impossible. Meanwhile, the evil spirit observes the chaos calmly. Pharma's father asks the Empress to take the plague medicine as a precaution and informs her they are trying to deliberately contaminate the Empire, suspecting it to be his former colleague, a brilliant pharmacist but not very sane, who was imprisoned for conducting horrible human experiments, having his divine art sealed, and his research was precisely on epidemics, making him a suspect. Everyone attempts to stop the 5 knights when Solomon appears and removes their divine arts. Just as Pharma finally arrives in time to hear them confessing they didn't even know what they were transporting, only following orders from an evil spirit threatening them, and his father recognizes from the description that it was indeed his former colleague. Meanwhile, Lotte, along with Cedric, decides to return to the pharmacy, exactly where the evil spirit was. Pharma and his father perceive its presence and also run there. Arriving at the pharmacy door, Lotte finds it open, thinking it's Pharma, and runs to see him. Cedric follows, worried it might not be Pharma, and indeed he is right. The evil spirit appears behind him, stabbing him with a sword. When Pharma arrives, both his friends were already wounded, with a blow containing various poisons. While his father keeps his former colleague occupied, Pharma strives to remove all the poisons as quickly as possible from both their bodies. When done, he discovers the evil spirit came to use his medicines to make powerful poisons and attempts to convince Pharma to join him, saying he too will be judged by society for his power. But of course, Pharma refuses, saying a pharmacist should use their skills to heal, and knocks the creature out the window. Subsequently, Pharma jumps down, killing him with a strike from his staff, which turns everything into rainbow glitter, and Solomon recognizes it as yet another power of the god of medicine called the Sanctuary of Purification used to eliminate evil spirits, and so everything ends well. Time passes and Latte and Cedric receive appropriate treatment. Ellen continues her work inspecting ships and Pharma distributes sufficient treatment to all pharmacists. And with the old lady's research, soon vaccines will be available. Thus, 2 months later, the Empress declares the end of the epidemic and everyone celebrates at a fair. And finally, Parallel World Pharmacy resumes operation with many customers as usual, to Pharma's delight. And let me ask, did you enjoy this anime? I found it quite interesting in the way it presents how humanity evolves over time, because back then we didn't know about viruses, medicines, surgical treatments, all this technology and knowledge, and Pharma, being from a more advanced era, arrives in that world with much knowledge. It's as if someone 300 years in the future came to our current time.